Hello. Can you guys hear me? Okay. You can also see the screen, right? Okay. So, um, okay. We'll start. So today is the 7th session, and we'll discuss lectures 19 to 21. Here are the important links as always. So today we'll discuss the module distribution and abundance. We look at lectures on biogeography, on why things are where they are, and we look at some push and pull factors. And in the next module, we'll look at management of threatened species. So we'll start. So the first chapter was on biogeography, which is the analysis of geographic distributions of species. So yeah, biogeography is basically the study of the geographical distribution of life on Earth and the reasons for the patterns one observes on different continents, islands, and oceans. So basically, we are looking at all the different species, whether they are terrestrial or aquatic or airborne, doesn't matter, and across different uh, areas, geographical areas such as across continents, islands, and even oceans. And we look at how these species are distributed. So where are they found? And basically why they are found there and why are they found in that particular range and nowhere else. Right. So a range is basically a range of a species is basically the geographical area within which that species can be found. So yeah, basically the area within which a species is found. So I talked about a few what do you say, uh, zones of like uh, basically different kinds of habitats that we find in India, uh, in and across India, and what kind of patterns in flora and fauna we see there. So the first one is this alpine meadows. So these are basically uh, grasslands on top of mountains, basically with very short grass. So alpine means mountainous and meadow means basically grassland. So uh, they're generally found in like high above in mountains such as in the Himalayas in Jammu Kashmir and also in Uttarakhand. So the characteristic of this habitat is basically they have very low temperature because it's very at very high altitude. So there's like high wind speeds throughout the day. So basically what happens during the day is um, if you see here in this diagram. So during the day, what happens is this top part of the slope gets heated much faster. So the air above it tends to warm and it rises up. So once this air goes up, the cold air that is present in the valley comes up to fill the place. So basically, you have high winds during the days. So this is known as valley breeze. And during the night, what happens is again this part loses heat faster, so it cools down. And because cold air is denser than hot air, so this moves down to the valley. And this is known as a mountain breeze. So basically, because of these phenomena, there's always high speed winds found in areas like this. The soil is less fertile due to rain. So basically, since these are on top of high mountain, there's not a lot of depth in the soil, so there's very shallow soil. And whenever it rains, what happens is uh, minerals from the soil gets dissolved in the rainwater and then it flows down the mountain. And that's why the soil becomes less fertile. And what? Yeah. So then after that, we also have alpine forests, which are basically filled with coniferous trees, and they are also found in like these mountain slopes, high mountain slopes. So basically here, the major difficulty that plants face is uh, heavy snow. So basically, if you have a tree like this, which has a very big canopy cover, what happens is during snowfall, a lot of snow will get deposited on the trees, and eventually it will lead to breaking of branches, basically destruction. So what how the trees that are present in this area are is basically they have a conical structure. So like Christmas trees, basically if the snow falls, it does not stay on the tree, but it flows down on these slopes of the branches and the leaves. Like so, mostly the trees that are found in these alpine forests are coniferous trees, and yeah, uh, there are like some unique fauna that are found in places like this, such as the pika, which is found in Ladakh and Uttarakhand. And yeah, these forests are also mostly found in high mountains present in Uttarakhand and Jammu and Kashmir. Next, we have moist deciduous forests. So these are basically uh, deciduous forest. So deciduous means basically the trees here shed their leaves in particular season. So trees, some species of trees might shed their leaves in summer to prevent like loss of water due to transpiration. But some other species might also shed their leaves during spring. So what do they do is they basically deposit all the waste matter in the leaves, and then basically during spring these leaves fall off. So due to these shedding of leaves, there's a heavy ground cover that is present in this area. And also due to rains, there's a lot of moisture that is present. That's why they are known as moist deciduous forests. So examples of these would be sal forests. Next, we have dry deciduous forests. So basically, these are also deciduous forests because they have trees that shed their leaves from time to time, like during particular seasons, and they are much drier. So that's why they're known as dry deciduous. So there's a less amount of moisture present in the air. And some examples of deciduous forests include teak forests, and they're primarily found in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. Next, we have scrub forests. So, scrub forests are basically found in uh, more drier areas. So, which is very frequented by like there might be annual droughts or uh, seasons of very dry weather. So, due to this lack of water, it does not support a lot of large trees. So the trees that are generally found here are very short. And the other thing is, whatever trees are found here, they generally have basically uh, thorns. So their leaves are converted to spine to prevent loss of water and also to uh, give protection. They also generally have like a waxy covering on their stem that prevents loss of water and also reflects heat. So yeah, and since these are like shrubs that are found, these are known as thorny shrubs, and they're generally found in Rajasthan and Gujarat, but we do have some scrub forests here near Bangalore. Then the next habitat that we might encounter is somewhere in like Jaisalmer or like towards western Rajasthan. So which is basically these sand dunes. So it's a very, very dry area, and the sand is constantly moving from one place to another due to winds. So very less vegetation is found, and very rarely water is found. So species that are very adapted to very dry climates like this are the only ones that can survive there. So one such example is the spiny-tailed lizard. So they're basically adapted to these hot climate, and they can stay without water for a longer time. And because their predators cannot do the same, because their predators are not adapted to this habitat, so general predators of lizards. So what happens is basically they don't have any predators in these areas, and that's where their population generally like thrives. So next we have estuaries. So estuaries are basically, mm, so as you see in the photo, a river that is coming from this side is basically meeting the sea. So this area is basically called as estuary. So it has uh, fresh water and salt water that is both present. So the river mostly contains fresh water and sea contains salt water. So if you look at here, yeah, if you look at here, you might have very low amounts of salinity. But if you look at somewhere here, you will have very high amounts of salinity because this is closer to the sea. And in these areas that are in the middle, you will have some medium amount of salinity. So the animals that plants that might be living here should be tolerating a broad range of salinity because they might have to move from one place to the other, like especially the animals. So these species should be adapted to living in like these varying levels of salinity. And there, yeah, might be a lot of sediment load because a lot of these things that these rivers are carrying will be deposited here. So that would lead to a lot of nutrients that are present in this area. So one unique habitat that is present in India is the Run of Kutch, where basically we have these uh, dry kind of lands, uh, flat lands that are present during the dry season. And when it rains, they are generally filled with water. So, like uh, water from the sea generally comes in and floods the area, and that basically uh, so the place is inundated for the months of monsoon. And basically, because of the seawater entering into the land, the uh, groundwater is very salty, and the area as a whole has very high salinity. So, uh, again, another species that is found here that is well adapted to the a place like this is the Indian wild ass, and we have the Indian wild ass sanctuary here in Run of Kutch. So their predators again are not adapted to living in these high salinity and dry conditions, and therefore they thrive here, and they have adaptations that help them survive in these conditions. We also during the months of monsoon where it's flooded, we also see flamingos that are coming here. So flamingos are basically migratory birds, and they come here to breed. So they're breeding grounds, and generally they have pink color because of the uh, pink food that they eat here, basically. So the fishes, the shrimps and the other uh, things that they eat, uh, grasses and stuff, basically have high amounts of carotenoid, which provides a pinkish color, which is then seen in the flamingo. Next, we have lagoons such as silica. So lagoons are basically again like similar to kind of similar to estuary. So let's say we have land here. So this is a lake, and this side is basically the sea. In this case, the Bay of Bengal. Then you have rivers that are draining into this lake. And these are basically sandbars. So these are basically mm, highly, slightly elevated sand structures. and there are like gaps here where seawater can get in and get out, and basically there's river water that's coming from these other places. So basically here again we have a gradient of salinity where this part of the water will be much more saline than this part of the water, right? And the water that is present here is generally very shallow, so 2 to 3 meters depth. So what happens is the light, the photosynthetically active radiation that is present in sunlight, can travel to the bottom layers also. So that's why it gives a much more volume for photosynthetic life to develop and occupy. And because there's a lot of sediment deposition from rivers, and also because of agricultural lands nearby and runoff from agricultural lands, mm, there are a lot of nutrients that are present in the water. So thus increasing the amount of life that it can support, amount of biodiversity that it can support. So generally they support large populations of fishes, and because there are fishes, we have predators of fish such as the Irrawaddy dolphins or the piscivorous birds that generally are found here. We also have a lot of other fauna, water fauna such as shrimps and other crustaceans also. And yeah, the next unique habitat that we have is the Brahmaputra floodplains. So basically, what happens is let's say the Brahmaputra river is flowing like this. So what happens is during some months, due to large amounts of rain, this river overflows. So basically, water overflows into the sides. So this area that is present beside the riverbed is basically the floodplain. So every year it gets flooded, and because that happens, generally the areas whatever is flooded, the plant life dies there, and that's why there are not a lot of trees that grow because every year they tend to die. So there are just like a lot of grasses that are dominating. There's a lot of sediment deposition due to flooding, so that increases the fertility, and that's why this fast-growing grass species generally tend to come up here. And because there are a lot of grasses, they support a lot of herbivores, such as the one on rhinoceros and other animals. And even like these herbivores can support carnivores such as tigers. So the climate here is slightly more equitable, so bearable. It's not a lot of cold or hot. Next, we have the Shola forest, which is basically found in the upper reaches of the Western Ghats. Uh, Mostly, majorly, these are found in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So basically, what we have is the mountaintop is generally covered with a mixed distribution of like grasses and forests. So the forest is not intruding upon the grass, and the grass is not intruding upon the forest. But if you were to plant a tree here, it would grow. If you were to plant grasses inside the forest, it will grow. But it's just that naturally they are like separating due to competition or something. Okay, so as with all mountain tops and high elevation areas, there's high wind speed, and that's why the trees that are found here have very short height. So if you have a tree that is very big and very high speed winds, so the like very high, yeah, very high speed wind. So this big tree has a big surface area, and thus it will tend to break or bend or get damaged. But if you have a very short tree, then the amount of air that it gets is not that much. It can generally survive. So generally you have like trees with shooted growth, and also you have trees that are clubbed together, because if you have a lot of trees that are clubbed together, only the first few trees will bear the wind, and after that all the other trees would be safe. Right. And because they have a lot of uh, they have basically two different kinds of habitat together, such as the forest and even the um, what is it, grasslands. They support a rich biodiversity of many different species of flora and fauna, butterflies, birds, and whatnot. Mm, Then we have equatorial forests, which are generally found in Andamans. So the islands located closer to equator. So basically here the temperature is almost stable throughout the year, and you basically, let's say, have lots of rain. Let's say raining uh, almost every week evening there's rain, and basically the days are also very similar across the year, and there's a lot of sunshine because it's closer to the equator. So therefore, it has a lot of uh, water, a lot of sunshine, and therefore it can support a large variety of trees and tall trees. So basically, they are like very tall forests with proper canopy, understory, and all structures. So another example you might think of is like Amazon, which is also on the equator. So Amazon forest in Brazil. So next we also have mangroves. So mangroves are typically found in like marshy areas where generally it tends to get flooded and like the land is not that you say solid. It's like semi-solid kind of. So these plants have pneumatophores, so which are basically these things that you see coming up here. Right. So these are basically roots, aerial roots of the plant that are protruding from down to up, and they basically get air from the atmosphere because there's no air inside it. And because of this structure of their roots, they have a lot of these small holes and areas where generally fishes can find and escape, fishes can hide and escape predators. So basically, it supports a large variety of fishes, which generally take shelter here. Because of the presence of fishes, it supports other different larger fishes and larger fish like piscivorous birds and stuff. And it also supports crocodiles because crocodiles generally find it easy to trap their prey inside these roots and then tear the body apart or easily break them and eat. And because there are a lot of piscivorous birds that come here and sit here, and when they basically leave droppings, that is how this area gets its nutrients such as nitrogen, ammonia, urea, and stuff. Right. So the question that we ask is like, why, where are species found and why? So we saw that we have a lot of different kinds of habitats and areas, and all of these habitats shelter all different kinds of flora and fauna. So the species that are found in one habitat will very are very less likely to be found in another. Right. So, for example, mangrove forests are generally found in marshy areas. They won't be found on generally on mountain tops. Right. So these things. So basically, why are these species found where they are, and where are they found? So there are various different factors that affect these things. So factors such as abiotic factors such as soil uh, variables such as um, pH or salinity. These things basically affect the plant life that can grow in an area, the amount of the different kinds of nutrient that are available also determine the plant life and the initial plant life that can be found there. The climate, basically, if it's very cold or if the place is very hot, that also affects the species that are found there. Then, apart from that, some species might be found in certain areas. So, for example, mm, let's say we know that mm, Pika is found in Uttaranchal or Uttarakhand. So the predators of Pika will also be found there because basically the prey is present there. So availability of predators, prey, and like if there are less predators available, then prey population will be higher. So these basically biotic factors, such as if there are prey or if there are competing species around or not, will also factor in while figuring out why a species is found somewhere or not. And the third thing is, where is the species adapted to? So what kind of adaptations that the species have, and can these adaptations help it survive that uh, habitat or that place? Right. So generally, species need some certain conducive factors, and those generally don't depend like even in certain latitudes and certain altitudes, you can have these things. Mm, So basically, what I meant is, uh, let's say around latitude 30. So this is the area where you generally find subtropical forest, right? So from this latitude to this latitude, and in latitude, let's say 10, you don't find subtropical forest in general. But if you were to go to a higher elevation in at 10 latitude, then at that place, the temperature and other climatic factors will be very similar to basically this area. And that's why you will also find subtropical forests here. So basically, what matters for these uh, different kinds of forests or trees to grow is the climatic and the soil factors that are present, and not the altitude or the latitude. Exactly. So even in one latitude, you can find different kinds of forests if you change the altitude, and even in one altitude, you can find different kinds of forests if you change the latitude. The next thing we do in biogeography is basically, so let's say we know that this is the distribution of snow leopard. So these are all the different places where it is found. So mostly in the Tibetan Plateau and some parts in like upper areas closer to Mongolia and Afghanistan and all. Right. So basically here we can ask a lot of questions that can help us figure out why we see this distribution. Right. So the questions will be, why do we find snow leopards here? Let's say any area here, right? And the next question can be, why don't we find snow leopards here, right? In this area. And the third question, which is like slightly different, is basically, so let's say I say that snow leopards are found here, right? So this area might have very similar climate and other conditions due to proximity, right? So this area, if it's suitable for snow leopards, this area should also be, but they are not found here. So the question is, why are they not found here? Right. So basically, the first question was, where are they found? So that's how we got the distribution. Maybe we went and did observations or looked at pug marks and stuff like that, and we saw that here all we find snow leopards. And then the next question is, why are they found here? So is there something common across all these areas? And that's why the species is found there. And the third question is, if there is something common and if you find something where like due to this climatic factor or this thing, that thing, the species should be found here, then why is it not found here, which has very similar climatic structure and all that? And the fourth thing is, why is the species not found anywhere else? So irrespective of whether it is close or far away. Right. So these are the four questions we can ask to understand like why a species is where it is. And same thing, we can like basically also try to correlate species occurrence with abiotic factors and see how it affects. So for example, here we see what is the minimum and the maximum sea surface temperature, and basically how coral reefs are distributed. So we see that generally probably they are not able to tolerate these high temperatures, and that's why they are not found in these areas anywhere. Right. And they generally are found in this contour, which has probably like lower temperatures which are more like more similar to more closer to their natural body temperatures or things like that. Right. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, we'll continue. So the next lecture was why are things where they are? So basically, these are basically the four questions that I outlined before. So what species are found in a place? Why are those species found there? Why are they now not found in areas of similar climate or other topographic similarities? And the fourth thing is why are they not found somewhere else, like some other unrelated place? So these four questions are the main questions that we decide, that we basically tackle in the study of biogeography. So uh, yeah. Uh, So basically, when we ask the question of why are these snow leopards found in these orange areas and not found in other areas, right? So the mm, answer we can frame in terms of something called pull and push factors. So pull factors are factors that basically attract organisms to a certain area. So, for example, these orange areas will have a certain pull factor that are pulling these snow leopards to come into this area or stay in this area. So, pull factors can some examples of pull factors can be like uh, amicable climate. So basically, the climate is within the optimal functioning zone of the optimal functioning range of the organism, or like it's at a perfect temperature close to its body temperature, so it does not have to basically use a lot of energy to maintain its body temperature and things like that. And there's a lot of rain or dryness depending on whatever the species wants, and basically a lot of water or less water, things like that. And food availability can be basically prey presence, or like it's the herbivore, then presence of um, plant material, and if it's like plants in presence of sunlight and water basically. So these are basically pull factors that um, attract a organism or a species to a given area. And the other thing we have are basically push factors. So these are basically conditions or factors that drive organisms away from a given area. So basically, the thing we can say is these orange areas have some pull factor, which is why they're pulling the species here. And these areas, so for example, you see that the species is found all across this, but it is not found in this area, right? So that means this area would have some push factors. So that are basically pushing the species away from that area. Maybe there's a predator of uh, snow leopards, or maybe the slope is too high, or maybe there are no prey that is available in that area, right? So things like this. So food scarcity, which is unavailability of prey, inhospitable climate. So if it's like snowing there all year round, then that might not be something that is favorable for the animal or for it to stay, right? So these are two factors, two ways in which we define factors that can be like basically pull factors or push factors. So, for example, if we are analyzing this situation where we have a um, mountain slope here. So, if you see on this back mountain here, we see that some slopes, basically these areas, have a lot of trees, right? Or shrubs or whatever vegetation. But the other area, this white area, basically on the other side of the slope, does not have anything. Right. So what might be the cause of this? Right. So we can imagine that these areas which have like the trees and all might have some pull factors which are basically pulling the tree population to be at that site. So probably there's more sunlight that is coming on this slope, or maybe the slope is not that uh, steep. So maybe like the slope is only this much, and there's a lot of sunlight that is coming here. And because the slope is only this much, there's a generous amount of soil that is present there for trees to grow. But on the other side, if you look at this other slope, maybe it is very steep, and that's why it cannot hold a lot of soil. So maybe there's not a lot of soil, and maybe the sun is not shining on this one a lot. Maybe the sun is moving mostly facing the other slope. So that means it might not have a lot of sunlight also. So these two things can be push factors that are basically pushing away the species from these slopes. And these two, the more amount of sunlight and more amount of soil and nutrients, might be pull factors that are pulling the trees to be present in this area, this geographical region. Right. So but apart from pull factors and push factors, there might be other forces that might be deciding what animals or organisms or species are present in a given area. So, for example, like uh, pumas are not found in India, right? They live in similar, they live in areas that are very similar to what we have here out in Africa, but they are not found here, even if the climate and the area and everything is the same. If we were to supposedly take some pumas from there and put them here, they might survive here and thrive over by feeding over the um, like huge population of deer and cheetal and all other herbivores that we have here, right? But why are they not found here? The reason can simply be that they have not found a way to come here, right? So basically, they are confined to that area because they have not moved out of the area. So if you find a species that is present in one area, then for the species to move into the broader area, it takes a longer time. So to disperse from here to here and increase its range or move to some more hospitable areas that are nearby, it generally takes time. And that's why um, they are not found here. So there's no pull and push factor here. So this thing is called dispersal. So dispersal is basically the movement of individuals away from their place of birth or hatching or seed production into a new habitat or area to survive and reproduce. It's basically like they're colonizing new area as they move. Right. So that's called dispersal. So this is different from migration, which we had talked about earlier. Migration is basically the going and coming back. So it's a place that you visit and then you come back from. But dispersal is moving from your native place to another new area in the hopes of surviving and reproducing there and like extending your range and all that. Right. So because of dispersal, many species are present in one area, and maybe if given enough time, they will move around and go into other areas. Right. And the other thing is anthropogenic factors. So basically, these are man-made factors such as man-made forest fires or pollution or clearing of forests, which basically prevents some species from accessing certain geographical areas. So, for example, here we can see that basically we have a huge forest on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side, we can see there's probably a road and the like grasses or agricultural fields. So this area and this area probably have the same climate and the same amount of rainfall and other factors. So basically, these areas are similar, and these forests would naturally have been present here. But because we cut them down to make roads and to make what is it, farms and stuff, basically these trees are not found on this side. Right. So we, by the effects that we have on our environment, also mm, lead to a lot of changes in species distribution. So the next things I talked about was habitat selection. So habitat selection refers to a hierarchical process of behavioral responses that may result in disproportionate use of habitats to influence survival and fitness of individuals. So basically, what does this mean? So let's say we are talking about a forest here, right? So there are, let's say, two trees. And let's say there's a water body in the middle. And let's say there are a lot of insects on this tree and a lot of insects on this tree. And let's say we have a bird that comes and it basically nests here out of chance, or maybe because the bird like the what is it leaves of the tree, or maybe it's easier to make a nest with the leaves of the tree, or things like that. The bird somehow has a preference for this tree over this tree. So even though the bird can naturally survive here, build a nest and grow, survive, reproduce, the bird can do the same here, but the bird chooses to do it here because of some hierarchical behavior, hierarchical behavioral response that the bird has. Uh, so basically, it's disproportionately using the different parts of the habitat, and basically that also influences or affects the survival or fitness of its individual, because if it's preferentially using some uh, tree which does not have a lot of um, snakes, or which has leaves that are easier to fashion into nest, then it will help increase its fitness and help it survive better and produce more offsprings compared to birds that might be nesting on the other tree, which is full of snakes or other things. Right. So basically, the bottom line is some species have preference for certain habitats or certain, like basically idiosyncratic choices among certain other species that they want to interact with. Right. So in birds, people experimented and found out that this habitat selection has both innate and learned components. So what do we mean exactly? So basically, these people, they looked at these this chipping sparrows, and basically what they did was they caught adults from the wild, and they gave them a choice between basically a pine tree and basically a oak tree, and basically they saw mm, what amount of time they spent in the pine tree and what amount of time they spent in the oak tree. Right. So they figured out that in wild caught adults, the percentage was 71% of time was spent in pines and 29% was spent in oak. Sorry. So since more than 50% time it's spending on the pine tree, we say that the bird, basically the chipping sparrow, prefers this habitat, so the pine. Next, what they did was they basically got eggs from these nests and basically reared the individuals in the lab. So basically, from nests they have birds, right? And uh, basically, they don't show them any leaves or trees till they are adults. And after they are adults, they again give them this choice experiment where they give pine and oak trees and they see how long they are staying in what. So here also we see that more than 50% of the time they are found in pine trees. So this basically suggests that. So the first one was our basically control. We wanted to see if there is a preference. In the second experiment, after we did that, we figured out that even if we don't show them any leaf of any kind beforehand, they still prefer the pine tree. So maybe there is something that is innate or basically coded in their basically DNA, or some epigenetic factor or some drive that is there, that is basically fueling this choice or this preference, right? And so basically, that's what the second experiment tells us, that there's some innate component to this habitat selection, to this habitat choice or the preference. And then what they did was they reared these birds in the lab, and basically they gave them um, basically oak foliage. So they gave them oak leaves in the beginning while they were growing, and after that they presented them with the same choice, which is pine or oak. And here they saw that more number of times, more than 50% of the times, they are found in oak. So basically, if they are given from their birth, they are shown oak leaves and they get comfortable with oak leaves, or they think that oak leaves are better to make nest, or maybe I woke up in an oak tree, so maybe or in near oak leaves, so probably this is the one that was used by my mother to make a nest, right? So something like that. Basically, they're learning something, and because of that, their preference is changing. So people have shown that habitat selection has both innate and learned components. Next, to basically identify uh, what is the potential range of a species. So we know that basically a species is found in this area, right? So let's say this is the normal area where the species is found. So we can do something called a transplant experiment to figure out if the species is can be potentially found in a larger area. So basically what we do is, so let's say this is a control area. So this is basically the area where the species is known to exist. We will take a organism and we transplant it into this area, right? And we do the same. We take an organism and transplant it into the same area. So basically, this is our control. So transplanting from the area that we know the species exists to the area that is that where the species exists, because this helps us figure out if the plant that we are transplanting is or the organism that we are transplanting might be dying because or might be not able to survive and reproduce because of some thing that is there in the transplantation process, right? Because we know that the plant should survive in this area, right? So this is like a control. We want to check if the transplantation process is okay. And then what we do, we transplant a plant to another area. And let's say we transplant another plant to this area. Now let's say here the plant that we transplanted grows. Here the plant that we transplanted grows. And here the plant does not grow. So basically we know that there's no issue with our transplantation experiment or the procedure because the control is growing and it should grow. And because there's no growth here, we might think or we might need to figure out why there is no growth here. Maybe there are predators of this plant. Maybe it is facing competition from other species of plants and things like that. Right. And when we are transplanting the plant here and it is growing, we want to figure out why has the plant not gone here yet. So probably because it can grow here, right? So the plant is not increasing its area from here to here because it can't grow here because there's some predator or something competitive species that is present. But the plant can grow from here to here, but it is not found in this area. It is only found till here. Now, why is that? That might be because of dispersal. So that's how we can rationalize. So basically, what we can, after we do a transplant experiment, there'll be two things. Either the given that a control is okay, either the plant can be successfully transplanted or it won't be successfully transplanted and it will die. So, what conclusions can we draw based on if the plant is uh, surviving or dying? So, if we have a successful transplant, we can interpret that the distribution of the species or the plant is limited either because the area is inaccessible. So maybe while going from here to here, there's a river or there is some geographical barrier that is preventing the plant from going from here to here, but it can grow here, right? The other thing is time has been too short to reach the area. So basically, there's not been enough time for the plant to disperse to that area. So given more time, it might go to that area. And the third thing is the species fails to recognize the area as a suitable living space. So this is habitat preference. So basically, maybe there are some species here that the plant is not liking, or some area here that the plant is not liking, and that's why it's not preferring to stay here. It prefers to stay in this area. Right. So what if we have a unsuccessful transplant experiment like this case, the second case here? Right. So if you have an unsuccessful transplant experiment, that means the distribution can be either limited by other species due to basically predation, parasitism, competition. So we might have more predators in the nearby area, or we might have parasites or pests in the nearby area, or we might have more competition from other species, other similar species. Or the other thing might be the physical and chemical factors, such as the temperature, pH, salinity, and all these abiotic factors might not be suitable for the plant to grow. Right. Next, so I talked about Liebig's law of minimum. So we have been discussing or talking about this since a long time. Now we finally basically describe it in a bit more properly. Yeah. So basically, Liebig's law of minimum states that the rate of any biological process is limited by that factor in least amount relative to requirement. So there is a single limiting factor. So basically, what does this statement mean? So let's say you have a plant, okay, or a sapling or something, and let's say you have two areas where you can plant it, right? So let's say the plant needs 1,000 milliliters of water per day, right? And let's say nitrogen and phosphorus. Let's say it needs 1,000 ml of nitrogen, sorry, mg of nitrogen and 1,000 mg of phosphorus, right? And let's say in one area, where you are planting the plant, you have 1,000 ml of water available per day. You have, let's say, 800 milligrams of nitrogen available and 500 milligrams of potassium available, right? So we need to find out what proportion of the requirement is it available. So here, forget about the two areas. So here, basically 100% of the requirement is satisfied, right? Here, 80% of the requirement is satisfied because 80% of the amount of nitrogen is present. And here only 50% of the requirement is satisfied. So the lowest percentage is this, and therefore this potassium is the um, what do you say, single limiting factor for growth of the plant here. So if you have another area where you basically have 500 ml of water, 400 mg of nitrogen, and 1,000 mg of potassium here, because this is 40%, this is 50%, and this is 100%. Here, the single limiting factor will be nitrogen in the second case. Okay, so this is Liebig's law of minimum. So what this basically means is that the amount of potassium in the first place and the amount of nitrogen in the second place is the single limiting factor. So if you were to add more potassium here, growth will increase. If you add more nitrogen in the first place, growth won't increase. If you add more water, growth won't increase because the limiting nutrient here is potassium. But in the second case, if you add more water, growth won't increase. If you add more potassium, growth won't increase. But if you add more nitrogen, growth will increase because nitrogen is the limiting factor or the limiting nutrient here. Next, we have something called Shelford's law of tolerance. So this basically states that the geographical distribution of a species will be controlled by the environmental factor for which the organism has the narrowest range of tolerance. So basically, let's say we have a species, sorry, species A, which basically can tolerate temperatures from 10 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius, and it can tolerate pH from, let's say, 3 to 8, right? And it can tolerate salinity from 500 to 505, right? percentage. Yeah, yeah, exactly sure. But yeah, so basically the narrowest range that we have here is the salinity. Right, because the temperature is very wide, the range of temperature that the species can survive in. The pH also ranges from acidic to basic, so the pH range is also wide, but the salinity range is the narrowest range for which the organism. So the narrowest range for the environmental factor, which is salinity, for the environmental factor, which is salinity. So what they mean is basically the range of species A will be limited by the salinity because it has the narrowest range of tolerance for salinity. But if let's say all the areas in the world have a salinity of let's say 502 to 504, so that falls under the range of this species. That means it can be found in all areas across the globe. So that means this salinity is not more a limiting factor for the organism, or salinity does not affect the distribution of the organism. What will affect the distribution now more would be the pH, let's say, because the pH range is shorter compared to the temperature range. Right. So basically, Shelford's law of tolerance says that the geographical distribution of the range of a species will be controlled by the environmental factor for which it has the narrowest range of tolerance. Right. So due to global warming, what is happening nowadays is basically, so let's say we have a mountain. So this is basically a mountain that we had in, let's say, 2000s. And this is, let's say, a mountain that we will have in 2100. Okay. So uh, as we go up the elevation is the same, whatever it was before, right? So let's say this is 5,000 meters, 4,000 meters, 3,000, 2,000, and 1,000 meters, right? So earlier, due to this like altitude and the amount of sunlight that is falling in this area, uh, this region had a temperature of let's say 18 degrees, and this region around 3000 had a temperature of let's say 10 degrees. And we had a species that was able to survive in this area because its thermal tolerance was from 10 degrees Celsius to 18 degrees Celsius. Right. Now, let's say after a few more years, what happens due to global warming? There's a lot more sunlight, there's a lot more heat. Right. So what happens is now the temperature instead of, so the temperature here is, let's say, now 20 degrees Celsius, so 2 degrees more. That means the temperature somewhere here would be 18 degrees Celsius. And the temperature here, which was initially 10 degrees Celsius, is now 12 degrees Celsius. Right. And let's say that area here has temperature, let's say, not 10 degrees Celsius. So what will happen is the species is now found in this area because this lower area is too hot for it, and this area is more suitable now because the temperature falls within the range of the species. So what has happened is the range of the species is moving up the altitude, right? This has been noted for a lot of species of insects, such as um, malaria, which is generally um, as the temperature increases, what happens is the altitude at which you find like these malaria due to like mosquitoes and stuff also increases because if the temperature increases, the uh, basically the altitude which is suitable for the same species. So here again it was species A, and here also it is species A, but the range that was this is now something like this. So it shifted. So basically that shift This is the shift that we see here for basically malaria. Right. So, uh, yeah, one thing that we talked about slightly before was migration. So, what is migration? Migration also explains the presence or absence of a species in a given area, because some species might be present in a given area only during some particular season or particular months or times, but might not be found there in certain other areas. That might be due to migration. Migration is basically the regular seasonal movement of animals, often along fixed routes. So regular because it happens like every year, or let's say every some time step, every month or something like that. And seasonal because it happens in particular seasons. So birds generally that live in like Russia and Siberia. So when there are winters in Russia and Siberia during like November, December and all, the area there becomes full laden with snow and it becomes very cold for the birds to survive there. So generally they come from Russia to India, and they often come along fixed routes crossing the same points across the way. Okay. And basically, they come to India because it's slightly colder here and it's suitable for them. And they often come here, like basically because the climate is more amiable to them here and there's no snow and all such stuff. And the other thing is they might have find better resources such as food or prey here, and they might be breeding here. So they might have breeding grounds here. So they'll breed here, give rise to individuals, and they'll fly back to the other area. Siberia once it heats down during the summer. Right. So there are three modes of dispersal. The first is diffusion. So this is gradual movement that happens over several generations, often across hospitable terrain. So the example that we have here is basically movement of lions across the Gil landscape. So let's say we have Gujarat here and we have Gir here. We have, let's say, lions here that are slowly moving into this area or this area. So they're basically increasing the area. They're basically dispersing to a larger area. Now this is dispersal, not migration. Okay. So they're dispersing to a larger area, but over several generations. So like these might be the parents, the children might go and settle here, their children might go even further and so on. And all these places that they're crossing along the way are basically hospitable terrain for them. So they can survive in any of those places in between. Okay. So this is like continuous or gradual movement. The next one, the next mode of dispersal is basically jump dispersal, where basically we have very quick movement over large distances and often across unsuitable terrains. So in the first case, this dispersal might happen over the course of, let's say, 15, 20 years or something. But here in jump dispersal, dispersal might happen in very fast time scales, such as even across a few days or even, let's say, across a few hours. Right. So one example of jump dispersal is dispersal of rats on ships. So let's say we have some ships that are coming from, let's say we have um, ships that are coming along the river from this place to this place, right? So there might be some rats that might get into the ship here, and a few days or few hours later, they might arrive in another area. So even across rivers or let's say islands. So for example, rats can basically theoretically cross from mainland of India to let's say Sri Lanka or some other place, right? So the area in between, the ocean area, is basically a place that is unsuitable for the rats to grow, but they cross that area and it's a large area to cover, and they quickly crossed it because of the ships. And that's why this is known as a jump dispersal. So it's like they're jumping from one place to the other. The third mode of dispersal that we have is secular dispersal, where basically we have diffusion over evolutionary time. So basically, the migrants that arrive or disperse to the other location are basically diverged from the original population. So one example of this is dispersal of humans out of Africa. So basically, what happened was there were a lot of prehistoric humans in Africa, and they slowly moved over the European Asian plate to reach India. But by the time these people reached India, they had evolved and almost like diverse from the original population. So they did not look the same, talk the same, and other things like that. Right. So they had very different features from the other uh, individuals that are found in Africa from where they started their migration. So this generally happens across very long periods of time. Let's say 1,000, 2,000 years or maybe more than that. Right. So another reason why some species might be found only in some places and not in other places is allelopathy. Allelopathy is basically when organisms secrete something to prevent other organisms from growing in the areas that are dominated by these organisms or areas close by to these organisms. For example, this fungus penicillin basically uh, produces a chemical that prevents bacterial growth in these areas. So if you plate bacteria all across the plate, they will not grow in these areas because of this compound that this penicillin is secreting chemical. Similarly, for teak forests, teak trees secrete compounds into the soil, which basically prevent the growth of other plants in the area, so that the area is dominated by teak. So if we see that a species is absent in a region, then we can ask few questions to arrive at what might be the factors that are leading to this absence. So the first thing is we should ask is it because of dispersal? So basically, is the area inaccessible to the species, or is the area accessible to the species? So if the area is inaccessible, then we know that because of dispersal, the species is not present here. If given a chance, the species might come here if the area was accessible, right? But if the area is accessible, then we ask if it is a habitat selection or if it's a preference of the species. So is it preferring to stay in that given area and not move out to the new area? If that is the case, then it is habitat selection. If that is not the case, we look for other species that might be present in that area. And if like other species that are present in that area are probably, if they are known to be known predators or parasites or competing species with them, or if there is high incidence of disease in that nearby area, then that those might be biotic factors that are preventing the species from going to the new area. Right. And if that is also not the case, then we look at physical and chemical factors and we try to determine if things like temperature, light, soil, and other chemical factors such as salinity, pH, soil nutrients basically affect if the species is found in that area, if determine whether the species is not, why the species is not found in that area. Right. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So next we'll look at some push and pull factors in greater detail. So the first push factor that might be present for any given species is predation or predators. So basically here we see in an experiment in a lake, people measured the incidence of sea urchin and algae. So mm, not in a lake, basically the sea. Basically they uh, figured out uh, so if the sea urchin where it is present and where all the algae is distributed, so this is according to the depth basically. So we have areas where it is dominant, where the area is dominated by sea urchins. That area it generally has very low amount of algae that are present because these sea urchin are known to feed on the algae. Right, they are natural predators, and that's why wherever the sea urchins are found, this algae are not found. And wherever algae, so the other thing we notice is wherever algae are found, sea urchin are not found. So why are sea urchins not found? So the reason why uh, algae is not found in this area might be because of presence of sea urchins, right? But why are sea urchins not found in this area? right? So that might be due to some tidal action that is near to the shore or in shallow depths where basically uh, because of tidal action, they are basically dislodged from their area, and that's why they prefer to stay in these deeper waters, deeper areas. Okay. So how do we confirm that these sea urchins are basically the reason why this algae are not uh, moving into the other areas? So what these researchers did is basically they removed the sea urchin and saw if the algae then tend to go into that area. So across time, they measured the algal cover of the area that was cleared of sea urchins. They saw that over time, from 0% algal cover, the algal cover became 100%. So all of the area where they removed the sea urchins was recolonized by the algae. So that means the algae can potentially be found in that area, but because of the presence of the sea urchin, it is not found in that area. Right. So this is like, so we know that our species is found in this area, but it is not found in this area. So the species A, let's say we have a species B, which is basically the predator of species A. Right. So species B eats species A. So that's where we suspect that species B is the reason why species A is not found in this area. So what we can do is we can transplant species A here and remove species B from here. And if species A proliferates here, that means species A was not proliferating in this area because of presence of species B. Right. So in this case, B is the sea urchin and A is the algae. So they remove the sea urchin and put the algae in that. So basically, the algae slowly grew over that area. They didn't need to put it there. But yeah. So basically, the sea urchins are preventing the algae from growing there. So predators govern the distribution of their distribution and abundance of their prey only if these four criteria are fulfilled. Okay. So the first thing is, so we can say that the like distribution is controlled by the predator only if these four criteria are fulfilled. So the first is the organism does not survive when transplanted to a site where it does not normally occur unless it is protected from predators by cages. So basically what we do is we put some algae or some other species in a cage and then we put it into the new area so that the predator cannot attack it. And then we basically see that if it is proliferating, if it is um, um, proliferating, if it is caged, and if it's not proliferating, if it's not caged, then that means there is some effect of the predator, right? The second thing is there is an inverse correlation between the distribution of the organism and the suspected predator, or alternatively, in the places where it occurs, the organism is inaccessible to the predator. So basically, what this means is the distribution of the predator and the prey are basically not overlapping, right? So the areas where the prey is present, those areas should be inaccessible to the predator, and that's where the prey is thriving there. And the areas which are accessible to the predator, no prey is present. Right. The third point is the suspected predator is able to inflict lethal damage on the prey in experiments in cages or can be observed to do so in the laboratory. So here we confirm our suspicion that the predator is actually lethal to the prey. So the predator secretes something or basically has some eats the prey or does something so that it is able to inflict lethal damage on the prey. And the fourth point is there is direct evidence that the suspected predator is responsible for destruction of prey in the transplanted experiments. So, in the transplantation experiment without any cage or without removing the predator, we should see direct evidence that the predator is coming and destroying the prey or preventing the prey from proliferating. So, these are the four criteria that need to be filled, and then we can say that the prey distribution is governed by the predator distribution. But there may be other cases where predator distribution is basically governed by the prey. Sorry. So basically, here what we see is the species of Drosophila called Drosophila fascia is basically able to grow in the presence of a certain cactus, but not in the absence of the certain cactus because it's needed for its reproduction. Right, some metabolic compound that is present there is needed for the fly, but other species of flies are not able to grow wherever this cactus is present. So here, the presence of the cactus, because the fly is dependent on the cactus, so the presence of the cactus will govern because the Drosophila, the fruit fly, needs this cactus to complete its reproductive cycle. So the presence of this um, cactus basically determines if the Drosophila will be found there or not. If you have only a place where, so let's say generally how they grow Drosophila in the lab is basically they take tubes and they fill it with food and basically put Drosophila in there. So if you do that, Drosophila melanogaster is a species that generally people use. So that basically will grow. But if you do that same thing for Drosophila passia, that won't grow. It won't grow unless you add a piece of this cactus because the cactus is needed for this species to complete its reproductive life cycle. Right. So how can this be useful? So uh, basically, if we know about the biology and the life cycle of the pests and other pest organisms, we can basically pests, we can control their numbers. So here in this paper review, what they say is basically there's this pest which basically are called um, called something. I don't remember exactly, but basically they need these gooseberries and these pine trees to survive. So basically, these pests have a complicated life cycle. Basically, it's a fungus or something, and it basically needs for half of its life cycle, it needs to be on the pine tree, and for the other half, it needs to be on the gooseberry tree. So to prevent this pest from occurring, and generally these pine and gooseberry trees are found in nature to co-occur in forests and woodlands. So to prevent like this blister rust that it causes for pine, what people have done is basically they have removed gooseberry trees from nearby pine trees, and because now no gooseberry trees are present, this fungus is not able to complete its life cycle, and these pine trees do not have developed any pine rust disease. Right. We can also have interspecific competition that is governing distribution. So, in this example, in California, researchers saw that in March 15, 1959, they saw that this triangular piece of land was covered with territories of this red-winged blackbird, which is one species of blackbird. Right. But in March 20, 1959, most of these birds had moved out, and much of the area was taken up by tricolored blackbird species, which is much more dominant over these red-winged bird species. So here we can see how biotic factors such as presence of another species or competitors can also directly influence the basically geography where a given species is found. So if there is no competition, this species is found all across. But if there is some competing species, the species goes to the sidelines and majority of the area is occupied by the tricolored blackbird. Right. Uh, Next, so I talked about how we can experimentally demonstrate allelopathy for like grass. Mm, so basically, there's an experiment uh, that basically shows that grass has detrimental effect on growth of apple tree seedlings. So basically, what they do is they have this experimental setup where basically they have a pot and below that there's another pot. In the first pot, there is a grass, and the second pot, there is apple tree. So this is the normal case. It's called the control. Right. Here we are growing grass separately, apple separately, nothing is interacting with anything, and we are just seeing what is happening. The second one, in the second case, there are like holes here in the top container, And basically, when we drop water into the grass, what happens is water drips, like after it overflows, it drips down to the apple tree. So basically, the water that is coming here has whatever chemicals or secretions that the grass roots are uh, having, like allelopathic secretions or molecules or chemicals, compounds, they will basically be mixed with the water and fall down into the apple seedling. So basically, we will have these. Uh, 1 second. So in this case, we have a normal apple tree seedling. So that's why this is called control. In this case, we have apple tree seedling plus we have water drip from grass. In the third case, we have seedling and we have water drip from normal soil, like from soil. So why we do this? Basically, let's say someone raises an objection that maybe it's not the grass which is uh, causing the mm, detrimental effect on the seedling if the seedling is not growing properly here. Maybe it is something that is present in the soil. So to prevent that, so to make sure that that is not the case, to show that there is no effect of soil on this, we do this. So we just pass the water through the soil. So if anything is dissolved in the soil, will come out. So here what they saw is apple seedlings grow normally in this case and grow normally in this case, but they have shunted growth in this case. So what does it mean basically? It means that normally apple seedlings are growing as much height as they are growing. Okay. And when we are passing water through the soil, they are growing the same height. That is because the soil is not having any effect on the water drip from the soil is does not have any effect. And when we see that there is a detrimental effect to the plants that are growing in this area, in this grass water-fed area, we know that this is because of the water drip that is coming from the grass. And therefore, the grass is secreting some compounds that are basically having negative effects on the growth of the apple tree seedlings. Right. Another study that people did to basically um, see, so this allelopathy, so this is like interspecific allelopathy, where basically grass is preventing the growth of apple tree seedlings because it does not want any competition in the same area, right? But we can also have allelopathy that is found in the same species, right? So for example, let's say we have a tree, very large tree, it might be secreting because if like, let's say there's a plant here. Right. So there's a seed that falls here. So there's a sapling here. Let's say there's a seed that falls slightly distant here. Let's say monkey threw the seed. And let's say there's a seed that was dispersed by some bird or something. So let's say that seed is here. And let's say based on the amount of sun that is falling, this area, sorry, this area is the area that is shaded by the plant. This area does not have any shade, but because the plant might have very long roots, this area might be influenced by the plant from the ground. And this area is out of the shade range and out of the influence zone of the plant. Okay, so no roots are reaching here, let's say. So here we see that this seedling will not grow properly generally because it does not get enough sunlight. In this area, sometimes we might see that this seedling is also not growing even if there is enough sunlight. That might be because this mother plant is secreting some chemicals that are preventing the growth of this plant. Now, why is the case? Because the same plant growing nearby will of course lead to competition for resources and it will affect both the mother and the seedling and both of them cannot achieve maximal growth. Right. So that might be one of the reasons why this is happening. And this plant will eventually grow up to become a big tree because there is no influence of the mother and there is no shade and everything. Right. So this is the hypothesis and this is the basically way in which people say that mm, plants have intraspecific allelopathy. So this was seen in peach, where basically they had a um, area where they basically planted peach tree, followed by peach tree, followed by peach tree, and so on. And in another area, basically they planted peach tree, followed by apple tree, followed by peach tree, followed by apple tree, and so on. Right. So basically, mm, and here we'll have, of course, apple trees in another area, something. Right. So they had done this experiment in two places. So two sides of this, two sides of this. And basically what they found out was if peach tree is placed following a peach tree, then the amount of yield of the tree, so the amount of fruit that it yields, is significantly lower than the amount of fruit that it yields if it is present following the apple tree. So basically, this is attributed to allelopathic compounds that are secreted by the peach tree against the peach tree. Uh, so here's another example where basically these seedlings or Grevilla of the Grevilla robusta basically kill their own seedlings if they are in the nearby area, right? So not in the nearby area. So basically, what they did is basically they have these trees. They will give them water. And once the water is in the ground and it is leaching beyond the roots, they'll collect the water and basically they give the water to the seedlings. This water is known as leachate because it is leaching away all the or absorbing all the chemicals that are secreted by the roots of this plant. Right. So basically, they did this experiment in three places. So this Grevilla robusta is also known as silver oak. Right. So basically, when they did this experiment in sand, they found out that in the control case, when they're growing seedlings without any leachate, then 72% of the seedlings are healthy and growing. And if they, in this sand, if they put leachate and grow the seedling, then none of the seedlings survive. Right. So basically, this leachate contains some chemicals or secretions that are basically preventing the plant from growing in the sand because from 72% it becomes 0%. Again, similarly, if they grow the same thing in soil from silky oak plantation, they find that normally in control, 90% of the saplings grow, but if they add leachate, none of them grow. But when they did this experiment in rainforest soil, they found that almost 97% of the plants grow in control, but almost like very less plants grow in the leachate amount of when they add leachate. So almost 30% of the plants grow. But this is not zero unlike the other cases. Now, why is that the case? So this might be because rainforest soil might have some bacteria or other microbes which might be digesting or utilizing these secretions that this plant is making or tree is making. Right. So basically, there are these factors which are modifying the response of modifying the effect of this uh, allelopathy that we are seeing. Right. So uh, this basically leads the way to basically understanding that even though you might, what do you say? There might be some factors, some major push and pull factors. So this is basically a push factor, right? The leachate. The leachate is a push factor that prevents plants from growing near to its mother seedling. But the rainforest soil, due to the presence of microbes, can moderate the effect or modulate the effect of the leachate or modulate the effect of the push factor so that it's not as effective anymore and some plants can still grow. Right. So here what we see is acclimatization is basically another thing. Acclimation is another thing. So basically, what we are doing here is we are, let's say, acclimating some species, some fish at, let's say, this temperature, 10 degrees Celsius. Uh, then we see that at around 0 degree Celsius, 1 second. Then at around no, then at 0 degrees Celsius, it's lethal for the basically fish. So these are two species of fish, right? But so the 0 degree is lethal for the fish, and again this higher temperature, it is around 20 something, is temperatures above that is also lethal. So this is the range at which it is functioning better. Uh, this temperature to this temperature. Right. But if, let's say, the fish was acclimatized at a higher temperature, let's say around 20 degrees Celsius. Right. So that means now the fish is acclimatized. So the fish is, so initially the fish was in a pond, which was at basically 10 degrees Celsius, or an aquarium which was at 10 degrees Celsius. And now let's say we put the fish in another pot which has which is at 20 degrees Celsius. Right. So now we see if we take the tolerance of species of individuals from this 20-degree acclimatized fish, we see that this fish can stay at slightly higher temperatures, almost close to 25, let's say 24. Let's say the initial was 21. Right. But they also tend to die off very soon. So now they can't survive till 0 degrees. Rather, they start dying off at around 7 degrees Celsius. Right. And basically, because we have, so this is a narrow range species because it has a narrow range. And this is another species where we see the same thing. As we increase the temperature, the um, range of lethal temperature, the temperature tolerance basically varies as the acclimatization temperature increases or changes. But the range of temperatures that is tolerated here is much broader compared to this, and therefore this is a more broad, like this has fish is said to have a more broader tolerance compared to this fish. Right. Then next, we also see that mm, so because species are found in certain areas, they are adapted to that area, and those adaptations might sometimes last for uh, even few more generations. So, for example, let's say you take plants from these different areas of this Sierra Nevada range, mountain range. Basically, as we were talking about before, like mountain breeze, valley breeze, and all. So there's always high speed winds in the top of the mountains, right in the top reaches of the mountains, and therefore the plants that are growing there are much shorter than the plants that are found in like lower region areas. They're like much larger or much bigger or longer, right, taller. So what happens is basically if we see as we go up and up, the size of the plant decreases. Right. And when we go down, the size of the plant increases. And if we were to take some plants from here, here, and here, and we were to plant them all in the same lab under the same condition, we'll still see that the plants that we got from, let's say, here had shorter height than the plants that we got from, let's say, here, even after growing them in the same conditions because of, let's say, epigenetic factors or other adaptations, that long-term adaptations that these plants have to their habitats. Right. So tree lines, basically, let's say we have a mountain. So we'll have trees on the mountain, generally coniferous trees, right? So, but there'll be some trees that are found here, some trees that are found here, but there'll be a line above which there are no trees. So this line is called the tree line. So several factors can affect the tree line of a given mountain. So, for example, the lack of soil, maybe this area has no soil, and that's why there are no trees there. Maybe there are frequent droughts here, frequent periods of frequent dry spells. Maybe the leaves, it's too cold for the leaves and they get desiccated and die off in the winter. Maybe there is no snow, so there is no water and it's very dry. Maybe there is excessive snow that is lasting through the summer. Maybe it has a very short growing season and therefore trees cannot come up. Only small mosses or grasses or ferns might come up. Maybe there's rapid heat loss or cooling at night. Maybe the excessive temperatures during the day because the atmosphere is thinner on the top. Right. Maybe if it's like somewhere closer to the poles also. Maybe there are some aspects of high winds that are preventing the growth of plant in these areas. So there might be various factors that might be leading to these things. So to ascertain in a given area which is the factor that is leading to this absence, we can do transplant experiments. So, for example, we can uh, put some more amount of soil in this area and transplant a tree here and see if it grows. We can basically put some water in this area during droughts and transplant a tree to see if it grows. And if the tree grows here, then we know that it was because of a lack of soil. If it grows here, then maybe we know it is because of drought. And similarly, like for other things, let's say for snow and lack of snow and all, we can find regions where there are maybe less snow or regions where there's more snow, and we basically put the species there and see if it grows. So these kind of transplant experiments help us eradicate and figure out which factors are governing the distribution of or the range of a given species. Right. So, yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, sorry. Which diagonal, Honey? In this plot? It doesn't exactly represent anything. It's basically the line where x equal to y. So basically, if you draw 5, 5 should come here. If you draw 10, 10 should come here. 15. So it's basically the y equal to x line that is plotted here. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. So we'll just recap what all we talked about today. So we talked about biogeography, which is the study of geographical distribution of life on Earth. We talked about why species are found wherever they are found, a brief detail about that. We talked about the different habitats that are found across India, such as alpine meadows, which are these grasslands on mountains. We have alpine forests, which are like coniferous tree forests in mountains. We have moist deciduous forests, so very high humidity areas where trees shed their leaves. We have dry deciduous forests, where it's basically slightly drier and trees shed their leaves through a season. Then we have, in a particular season, then we have scrub forests. We have scrub forests, which are like very much drier areas, which supports only thorny scrubs or shrubs. We have sand dunes, which are extremely dry areas with only moving sand. We have estuaries, which are very fertile lands where rivers and seas meet. We have the fauna that is found here generally tolerates a high range of salinity. We talked about some examples of specific unique habitats, such as run of Kutch, which supports the Indian wildlife, and other migratory species such as flamingos. We talked about lagoons such as Chilika. We talked about Brahmaputra floodplains. Mm, Basically, all these lagoons and floodplains have like very high sediment deposition and high amount of nutrients, and generally have equitable climate, and a lot of um, wildlife can grow here. We have Shola forests, which are found in the upper reaches of Western Ghats. We have equatorial forests, which are found in like near the equator, such as in Andaman. And we have mangrove forests, which are generally found in marshy areas near the sea also. Mm, then we talked about why species are found where they're found. There may be things like abiotic factors, biotic factors, adaptations to particular habitats. Then we talked about these different questions and how we can relate to biotic, abiotic, and other factors. So the four questions that we talked about are what species are found in a given area, why are they found here, why are they not found in some other areas with similar climate and other abiotic conditions, and why are they not found somewhere else, right? So then we talked about push and pull factors. So basically conditions that attract organisms to area or conditions that drive away organisms from a given area. We looked at the example of vegetation on these slopes. So higher, steeper slopes might have less vegetations, or slopes that don't get enough sunlight might have less vegetation. Mm, Then we talked about dispersal. Um, so dispersal also helps explain the range of certain species. We also talked about anthropogenic factors that may be affecting the range of species, such as this clearing of forests and habitat destruction. We talked about habitat selection, which is where some species behaviorally prefers a given area or a given habitat, place of habitat. We talked that habitat selection has both innate and learned components, and we learned about transplant experiments, how we can identify the potential range, and how we can determine if the species is not present either because it is inaccessible, or it is there's not sufficient dispersal time, or if there's a habitat preference, or if species is not present because of other biotic and abiotic factors such as predation, parasitism, competition, etc., and and chemical factors also. We talked about Liebig's law of minimum, which states that there's always a single limiting factor. We talked about Shelford's law of tolerance, which says that the distribution is determined by the environmental factor for which the organism has an highest range of tolerance. We talked about the impact of global warming on range and distribution of organisms, and saw how uh, for malaria mosquitoes, the altitude increases as the temperature increases. The altitude at which they are found increases as the temperature increases. We talked about migration, why animals migrate and what is migration. Then we also talked about what are the three modes of dispersal: diffusion, which is gradual movement over several generations; jump dispersal, which is sudden movement over large distances; and secular dispersal, which is diffusion in evolutionary time, where basically the migrants might have evolved into different species compared to the original people who started a migration. We talked about allelopathy and some examples of allelopathy. We talked about how we can figure out why a species is absent in a given area by asking questions. Then we talked about some push and pull factors in greater detail, how predators can influence prey population, how prey can influence predator population, how basically we can use these use this knowledge to control growth and regulate growth of pests and other occurrence of diseases in plants. Mm, we talked about how interspecific competition affects the distribution of a given organism, and we saw how we can experimentally determine if allelopathy is going on. and looked at other examples of uh, intraspecific allelopathy. And basically, mm, we notice here that basically, even if there are some push and pull factors, there are factors that might be modulating the effect of these push and pull factors, such as acclimatization. And basically, we talked about adaptations, how species are adapted to their habitats, and even after we grow them in other conditions, they might still show their adaptations, or basically their um, previous adaptations might still be present due to epigenetic and other factors. Then we talked about how we can distinguish what different factors are causing the range or distribution by doing transplant experiments. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So we'll stop here. We'll meet next week. Thanks for coming. Bye.